If you have ever heard anyone say that we are all made up of atoms and atoms never touch, you heard the truth. Knowing and understanding that is one thing, but the next question you should be asking is, if I never truly touch anything, then how am I able to perceive the sensation of touch, or in other words, how do I physically feel things? By the way, if you stay to the end, I have a bonus explanation for you, explaining how traces of touch is left behind, since you never actually touch anything. This video is jam-packed with tons of information, so stay focused. So let's start with understanding atoms first. The world around us is made up of matter, which is composed of atoms and molecules. Atoms are the basic building blocks of matter, and they combine to form molecules, which in turn make up everything from the air we breathe to the food we eat. Atoms are incredibly small, with a typical diameter of around 1 angstrom. To represent the difference, imagine you have a standard-sized soccer ball, which represents a grain of sand. In comparison, an angstrom would be like a single water molecule within that soccer ball. They consist of a nucleus made up of protons and neutrons, surrounded by a cloud of electrons. The number of protons in the nucleus determines the atom's identity. For example, all carbon atoms have 6 protons, while all oxygen atoms have 8. Molecules, on the other hand, are groups of atoms bonded together by sharing electrons. The way in which atoms bond together determines the properties of the resulting molecule. For example, water molecules are composed of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom bonded together, which gives them their unique properties of being a liquid at room temperature. The relationship between atoms and molecules is a fundamental aspect of the physical world. Everything we see, touch, and interact with is made up of atoms and molecules, and their properties and interactions govern the behavior of matter. Now, let's move on to the physics of touch. You see, despite the sensation of touching an object, the truth is that we never actually come into direct contact with it. This is because of the nature of atomic structure and the electrical repulsion of atoms. At the atomic level, matter is composed of atoms which are surrounded by a cloud of negatively charged electrons. These electrons repel each other, creating a force that keeps them apart. This force is known as the Coulomb force, and it is what prevents 2 atoms from ever truly touching. When we touch an object, what is actually happening is that the electrons in our skin and the object's surface are repelling each other. This repulsion creates a force that we perceive as contact, but it is not a direct touch. Instead, it is a result of the repulsion of electrons, which creates the sensation of touch. Despite the absence of direct touch, we are still able to perceive the sensation of touch because of the way our nervous system works. When our skin is stimulated, nerve impulses are sent to the brain, which then interprets these impulses as a sensation of touch. As human beings, we are constantly interacting with the world around us. We touch, see, hear, taste, and smell, all of which are possible because of the way our bodies are designed to detect physical stimuli. Physical stimuli can take many forms, including pressure, temperature, pain, and vibration. Each of these stimuli is detected by specialized sensory receptors in our bodies, which are responsible for converting physical energy into electrical signals that can be transmitted to the brain. Our skin, for example, is equipped with different types of sensory receptors that respond to touch, pressure, temperature, and pain. These receptors are located at different depths within the skin and are responsible for transmitting different types of information to the brain. All of these sensory receptors are connected to neurons, which are responsible for transmitting the electrical signals from the receptors to the brain. Neurons are specialized cells that are capable of transmitting electrical impulses across long distances. They are the basic building blocks of the nervous system and are responsible for all of our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The human brain is responsible for controlling all of our thoughts, behaviors, and bodily functions. It is made up of billions of neurons organized into different regions and networks that are responsible for different functions. The cerebral cortex, for example, is responsible for processing sensory information and generating conscious thought, while the limbic system is responsible for regulating emotions and motivation. When we receive sensory input from the world around us, it is processed by specialized sensory receptors and transmitted to the brain as electrical signals. These signals are then interpreted by the brain to create our conscious experience of the world. The process of perception involves several steps, beginning with the initial detection of sensory input by sensory receptors in the body. These sensory signals are then transmitted to the brain, where they are processed and interpreted by different regions of the cortex. Once sensory information is processed by the cortex, it is integrated with other information from the brain to create our conscious experience of the world. This integration involves the use of memory, attention, and other cognitive processes that allow us to make sense of the sensory input we receive. So guess what? For those of you who didn't skip to the end for the bonus, we have a hidden bonus right here. We spoke about physically feeling, and now we're going to touch on emotionally feeling. If you're loving this video so far, smash that like button to help us out. Emotions are a fundamental aspect of the human experience, influencing our thoughts, behaviors, and interactions with the world around us. The relationship between emotion and the brain is complex and multifaceted. While emotions are subjective experiences that are influenced by a range of factors, including genetics, environment, and culture, they are ultimately mediated by the brain. Research has shown that different brain regions are involved in the processing and regulation of different types of emotions. One of the key neurochemicals involved in the regulation of emotion is dopamine, a neurotransmitter that is involved in the reward system of the brain. Dopamine is released in response to positive stimuli, such as food, sex, or social interactions, and is thought to play a role in the experience of pleasure and motivation. Another important neurochemical involved in emotion is serotonin, a neurotransmitter that is involved in the regulation of mood and social behavior. Low levels of serotonin have been linked to depression and anxiety, while higher levels have been linked to feelings of well-being and contentment. Other brain regions, such as the prefrontal cortex and the insula, are involved in the regulation of emotion and the interpretation of social cues. These regions are thought to play a role in our ability to empathize with others and to regulate our own emotional responses. But to understand how emotions come about, we also need to look at sensations. Sensations are the raw information that our brains receive from the environment, while emotions are the subjective experiences that result from the interpretation of that information. Sensation is the process by which our sensory organs, such as our eyes, ears, and skin, detect stimuli from the environment and send signals to the brain. This raw information is then processed by the brain and used to generate emotional responses. For example, if we see a snake, our brain processes that visual information and generates a fear response. The process by which the brain interprets sensory input and generates emotional responses is complex and involves multiple brain regions. The amygdala, for example, is a key player in emotional processing, or processing of emotions, particularly in response to potential threats, such as fight or flight. On the other hand, the prefrontal cortex and the insula are involved in the regulation of emotion and the interpretation of social cues. These regions are thought to play a role in our ability to empathize with others and to regulate our own emotional responses. Past experiences can also have a significant impact on emotional processing. Research has shown that individuals who have experienced trauma or negative life events may be more sensitive to potential threats and may have stronger emotional responses to stimuli that remind them of those events. Additionally, positive experiences can help to build resilience and enhance emotional regulation. It is also important to note that emotions are not solely the result of sensory input. Our thoughts, memories, and beliefs can also influence our emotional responses. Thank you for making it to the end of this video, and here's your bonus. So, how is it possible to leave behind traces of touch? For example, if we never truly touch anything, how is it possible for us to leave traces of touch behind, such as fingerprints at a crime scene? The answer lies in the fact that when we touch an object, we leave behind a residue of oils, sweat, and skin cells. These residues are transferred to the object's surface, creating a visible mark that can be used for identification. Thank you for watching, see you next time.